Welcome back to the channel, everyone. So today, being that I have a semi-automatic fire control group for an AK here, I want to go over the differences between the two. And, well, the semi-automatic version is something I rarely have, whereas the fully automatic version, it comes with the parts kits, and I reuse it myself. Okay, first and foremost, let's get out of the way. If you take out a few pieces from a fully automatic fire control group, it acts as semi-automatic. There are little quirks to the full automatic being used as semi-automatic, but it's not bad. Whereas the semi-automatic was made specifically for that. Just get that out of the way real quick. I've got two fire control groups set up here. I got a few things in the middle that both would have. And I got a couple of bolt carriers just to kind of show you how they work together. The best way to do this is just to show you the differences piece by piece and kind of explain how they work together. So, first and foremost, we've got our safety selectors. Now, if you notice turn them around here, they're pretty much the same. Might be a slight difference here or there, but nothing major, pretty much the same, work the same way. The real difference is when you get to the back, you see this little area of metal here. It's bigger on the full auto version than the semi. And the reason for that, of course, is the safety selector itself engages the disconnector. And we will show that in just a second, but let's go ahead and look at these disconnectors, huh? Now, disregard the fact that I have a spring in this one. It's in there. This was actually installed in a gun just a little while ago. I pulled it out for this video. But you notice this tail on it. Whereas the semi-automatic one, it is the same thing exactly. Got a hole for the spring, everything. It just doesn't have this tail on it. And well, because with a semi-automatic setup, the selector, when it's in safe, it's pushing up against the disconnector. Something kind of like this, give or take. And what it does, it stops it from going backwards. It forces it engaged. Whereas when you're on fire, it's disconnected from the disconnector, basically. It allows the disconnector to move freely and do what it's supposed to do. Now, on our full auto version, it does the same thing on safe. It pushes up against it, locks it forward, basically engaged. In fire, it does the same thing. It's not touching it. It allows it to move freely, engage and disengage. But then that middle selection, that full auto selection, it's resting right here. And it forces it to not engage, basically. To be out of the way and not interfere. Now both disconnectors rest inside the trigger itself and basically will hold the hammer down like so, and once it releases, the trigger itself catches the hammer. But let's pull these aside and just look at these two triggers. Now these triggers are probably the only things that there is no real big difference. You see it's cut a little bit different, but that's about it right there. They are almost exactly the same. Now looking at our two hammers, you notice they are cut a little bit different right here, but that's not really a big deal. They're, for the most part, the exact same there. What is different is down here on the bottom of them. You see this one's got a metal sticking out for something to catch there, where this one doesn't. The semi-automatic doesn't because there's no need for that on it. For the full auto version, the reason it has this is because the auto sear. Now, you don't have an auto sear in the semi-automatic kit. We're getting into parts that there's extra parts in this full auto kit, of course. And that engages with the auto sear right here. And the auto sear, when it's tripped, it releases the hammer. Now, of course, it only trips when the bolt goes into battery. And I'm going to show you real quick. I got some bolt carriers here. Starting off, you see this bolt carrier. It's kind of smooth right here. Nothing really in its place. Kind of just where it catches on the rails. Now, on this one, this is a full auto bolt carrier. And you see, it's also got where it catches on the rails. But there's another piece sticking out here. This nub on the bottom. And that's what catches on our auto sear. And basically causes it to engage. Nope, almost dropped it. But yeah, that's how the bolt carrier itself reacts with the auto sear and how that works. Now, another part that you'll have on the full auto fire control group that you don't have on the semi-auto is the rate reducer, or the retarder, commonly referred to as a rate reducer. So it's pretty much what I call it most of the time too, but it fits in the trigger right here, and its main purpose is, while it does reduce the rate of fire basically, because the bolt has to ride over this, what it does is it ensures everything's in battery, for lack of a better explanation. Now, being that we talked about the rate reducer itself, I want to talk about this semi-auto trigger one more time, because it'll have this little tube that runs through it. And what this tube does, sits in it kind of like so, and it'll have another little piece that pretty much locks it in place. And what that does is it stops any side-to-side movement that it could have. Where without this, it actually can have a good little bit of side-to-side movement. It'll basically, if you take your access pin, it'll slide in the trigger hole back and forth. But yeah, so this is just a little way to stop that. Now, our full auto trigger doesn't have that issue if this rate reducer is here, which is why I do what I do a lot of times. You see, I've got another little rate reducer here, but it's different. I've whacked this top off right here, and I just use it as a spacer. Stick it in here, stick it in the gun. It doesn't interfere with anything anymore, but it's a spacer and it stops the trigger from moving side to side. So that is something you can do if you have a full auto fire control group and you want to use in your AK that is semi-auto. Now, in a semi-auto setup, you will also have one of these two, either a shepherd's hook or a retainer plate to retain your pins, and they do exactly that. You take your pin and it fits in this little groove on it. If I can get it to land in the groove, there it is. It causes it not to be able to back out. Very simple. Very simple indeed. It fits just like that. Can't back out, or fits just like this. Now, I've talked about these a little bit, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. But you need this on a semi-automatic version, because if you take your auto sear, and what you'll have is you'll have your pin running through this spring here. This is your auto sear spring, whatever you want to call it there. And there's a little hole right here. See if I can get it to line up. And this spring just fits perfect once this thing's all the way through. Spring just fits perfect in that little groove in your access pin. And you've got your auto sear set up, and it does that right there, as you guys know. And this spring will be set up to where your other two pins for your hammer and then for your trigger caught something like this basically, and it will retain them. So in the semi-automatic version, these two parts are removed. So now you need a part to retain your pins, and that's where these two come in. We got two pins here. That's of course on every AK, and if it's a full auto with an auto sear, it's going to have 3 pins if it's a machine gun. We've got our hammer spring, of course. That's in all AKs, and honestly, this is just a little ingenious spring right here that operates the trigger and hammer at the same time. But yeah, for the most part, that's the difference in the two setups, the semi-automatic fire control group and the full auto fire control group. Now, of course, you're going to be setting up your fire control group for semi-auto. So you won't have these two pieces in anymore. You'll only need 2 pins, and even in this setup, you will need one of these 2 things. But the full auto setup will work exactly the same as the semi. As long as you take these 2 parts out, they're both semi-automatic fire control groups at that point. They act that way anyway. And just for reference, neither of these parts are illegal to possess because they've never been used in a gun before. You get a new one with your kit, basically. And as long as it's never installed and your gun never has a 3rd pinhole, you're not breaking any laws. These, I usually just throw them away, honestly. I've got a couple around just in case I need to do a video, but for the most part, yeah. This auto sear, I just throw it away. So yeah, most of my builds have the full auto version, full auto fire control group in them. and most of them have a full auto bolt carrier. Now, either bolt carrier would work with either gun as long as everything's the right size and your bolt fits in it and everything like that. That would never be an issue. So yeah, difference between semi-automatic and full automatic fire control groups on AKs, that's it. I'm gonna cut into another style trigger here. So here's another type of trigger that you might come across, and it's just a double hook trigger. You see, we've got our disconnector in. We actually have the little sleeve running through it that's used as a spacer kind of. And you see, this other trigger, just a single hook. This one, 2 hooks on it, disconnector in it. And all this does is it just holds the hammer a little bit more evenly with 2 hooks instead of 1. Sometimes you get these in, they're actually common in milled AKs, not as common in stamped AKs, but if you notice the height difference on the double hook is a little bit lower, and that's not a bad thing. Sometimes if it's a double hook trigger and it's the same height, you have to have the rails cut a little bit for it to fit in, but for the most part, yeah, this is fine. Just another type of trigger. So anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you found this video informative. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll make a follow-up video if I have to. Not a big deal. Thanks for watching.